Mini episode 863 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to mini episode number 863 of the FDH Lounge. Specifically, this is the FantasyDraftHelp.com Insider, going back to our roots here, the FDH Lounge being something where anything and everything is discussed, but going back to our initial roots of talking just fantasy sports here on the Insider. Rick Morris, FDH Managing Partner, here today with a very special guest. It's always a pleasure whenever we're talking fantasy sports. We've gotten the opportunity to do this over the years, to meet different people, gain different perspectives, because again, we like to come from a very thoughtful perspective ourselves when we're talking fantasy sports. It's always great to talk to some of the other thinkers out there in the business and see what their perspective is. And today we welcome to the show for the first time Paul Shapiro from RotoExperts. He's got an excellent weekly column that you can check out there. We'll be talking about some of his most recent column data that he has put up, as well as some of his thoughts throughout the season. We'll be talking about the overall landscape of this 2017 fantasy baseball season, which is very, very unusual. A lot of people are comparing it to the height of the steroid era, but a little bit really kind of different because it's more the three true outcomes than anything we saw turn of the millennium when it was going at that point in time. So, Paul, welcome to the program, and it's a pleasure to have you on to kind of help decipher this really interesting and strange climate that we've got right now.
Hey, Rick, thanks so much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to chatting about the long ball today. Absolutely.
I mean, and that is the headline of 2017, and as I indicated to you off air, we went with, in our preseason guide this year, and it was a way I tried to handle it discreetly because there was something that we had heard on background from somebody very, very well placed in MLB that, again, there was no accident what you've seen the last year and a half coming into 2017 in MLB, and that, again, something was different with the baseball, and that was basically all we knew, all we were told, and it jibed with basically the data that you'd seen over the previous 18 months of on-field baseball. So you get into this year, and sure enough, it's played out, and again, it's a thing where you could have just made that prediction, I suppose, without the background information that we had, and you'd still be proven right just based on the way that it's gone, and really more extreme even than we'd seen it in the previous year and a half on field in Major League Baseball. So how we got to this point, Ben Lindbergh wrote an excellent column sometime back getting into the physics of it. In fantasy baseball, we're not so much concerned with the why or any of the science or anything like that, but dealing with the reality, understanding the reality, you get to a point where, much like turn of the century, you've got a thing now where speed obviously is a lot more valued because power it's getting cheap-end. I wouldn't say that it's cheap, but it's certainly getting cheap-end at the rate that everything is flying out of the park. And this obviously has to make it a very interesting climate for you to work in because you are somebody who really kind of specializes in trying to find the undervalued players. So talk about what that's been like to navigate 2017 as you've been looking through at the crop of guys.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so before the season, you look around this game and it seemed like there was power everywhere. But then you have guys, one guy that I touted before the season as my biggest undervalued player was Jay Bruce, where he was going after the 200th pick, and he was a shoo-in for 25, 30 homers, 90 to 100 RBIs, and I made sure to draft him in every league that I'm in. And thankfully I got that one right, and it's really worked out wonderfully, where I'm thinking of an auction league I got him for $6. His value is in the 20s probably there. Where I just look at right now at the All-Star break, there's 24 players with 20 or more home runs, and 10 or 12 of them were afterthoughts I'm saying after pick 200, 5, 6 of them potentially went undrafted. You know, you look at a guy like Mike Moustakas, who was in the home run derby on Monday night, 25 homers, where everybody forgot about him because he got injured the year before, but his numbers were out of this world. Logan Morrison, Justin Smoke, Eric Thames was a very tight guy, but still, I got him in the last round in 2 drafts.
Well, the Jay Bruce thing is interesting to me because when you look at the sort of the poster child for 2017 as we've been going through, Aaron Judge, I guess you look at Jay Bruce and you look at him as somebody who is essentially Aaron Judge with a big hole in his swing, maybe at his worst a hole that you could drive an 18-wheeler through. But with you focusing on a power guy like Bruce, albeit in a climate where power is cheap end a little bit at this point, I agree with you in a way that really seems kind of counterintuitive because I think power guys, look at Judge. In a power climate, the guys with the most power are really going to thrive even more, it would seem like. They're going to hit the ball even further than they would normally hit it. So while you might look around and say, maybe you can get power everywhere, I see you keying in on Bruce, and I agree with something like that because I have the same sense myself. Guys who can hit the ball far are going to hit it even further when the balls are flying out at this rate.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you have these quote-unquote speedsters who are hitting 10 and 12 homers in the first half.
Mm-hmm.
One example of this, think about Josh Harrison on the Pittsburgh Pirates, where he's the guy, I wrote about him last year, I wrote about him this year, where I'm picking him up because I think he's going to steal 25 bases. I'm not expecting him to be a 20, 25 guy, but that's what he's on pace for right now, which is wonderful, but, how is this happening? Unless your little tip about the balls is true.
It was, yeah, and that's the thing, and I don't claim to understand the science on that, but certainly the evidence certainly looks like what we had said coming into the season. It looks like it had kind of played out that way. But it's a thing where, yeah, you're right. There are unlikely guys that are getting power. There are guys that have hit 10 and 12 home runs and even more than that in the first half of the season. So it's a weird kind of climate as far as how that goes. But yeah, you've got a situation here too. One of the guys that you had talked about very recently in a column, Mike Napoli, that's a guy who's known for his power. Another guy, again, hole in his swing, and somebody who will, as a lifelong resident of the North Coast, he will always have a soft spot on my part. I will always think of last summer as the party at Napoli's summer. Along with the Cavs championship. But Napoli is a guy that, the season ends. He's out there on the market, and again, people kind of priced the career year kind of thing into it, so he ends up in Texas on a bargain. And your point, I thought, was very well taken in that the fantasy market sort of took after the way that the real market priced him coming off of last year, and it's probably an overreaction. And you look even now, even with the batting average being in the crapper, this is still a guy who can really deliver for you on the power with the home runs and the RBIs at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, he's in a great spot in the middle of that Texas lineup. He has 18 homers in the first half, and honestly, it's the quietest 18 homers.
Yeah.
Before I sat down to write this column, I'm not thinking about Mike Napoli.
Right.
I don't want the 194 batting average and an OBP under 300. But then you look at it, and the reason you pick him up and put him on your team, he has one job. That's to hit home runs, which then turns into runs and RBIs. And the fact that you can pick up a guy who's probably going to hit 35 homers for nothing. You drop a middle reliever, drop whoever that last guy is on your roster. Mike Napoli is a great guy to target, especially he has a 215 batting average on balls in play right now, which means that batting average that looks so bad is going to trend positively along with the home runs, which aren't going away.
I want to talk about a broader point because you got into something that's one of our favorite points that we like to make at FantasyDraftHelp.com. I will note in passing also, too, before I forget about this, your point about Josh Harrison and this being a good window of time to pick him up, I think is certainly very well taken because myself and my co-owner, we happened to get him the year after his breakout year, and that was pretty painful. So Josh Harrison pretty much does the best when nobody's thinking about bottom, so you want to get on him, when his production is still kind of quiet, because the minute there's any expectations on the guy, you're jinxing him or something like that, basically. So you're right about that, with this being a good moment to go after Josh Harrison, it would seem. But your point about Napoli and about some of the numbers being due to rise, certainly by the end of the year here, we have long talked about progression to the mean, regression to the mean, and basically where's the range you expect somebody to be in at the end of the season. And if they're well south of that at this point, that you're really going to get the production going your way. You're really going to benefit from it. And I remember a number of years ago making the point on the show, I think Jorge Posada at one point, earlier in the season, was hitting like 376. And I remembered saying on the show at the time that if you could dump him, not only would you be trading high, you'd be getting a lot of value, whatever, but it would be sort of the thing of like sending Lennon to Moscow in a boxcar, because you're sabotaging the other team that you're trading him to, because, he's probably going to hit like 225 the rest of the year just to go back to wherever his batting average for the year is going to be. So this whole thing about trying to time this and try to ride the highs and lows, as you said, is extremely, extremely critical.
Yeah, I mean, that's all that fantasy baseball is in reality. You want to buy low and sell high. It's the quote unquote problem of finding a trade partner.
Yep.
Which is why I live and die on the waiver wire, because getting somebody to want the guy that you want to get rid of is just as hard as finding that guy.
That very much is the case, and I have to say, from personal experience, while my co-owner and I have been battered by injuries in the non-keeper league that we're in this year, I can't cry too much about our luck when we were able to get Alex Wood off the waiver wire earlier in the year here. So those are the kind of things that basically, when that pans out, you pretty much have nothing to cry about the rest of the way. I was pretty interested to see in your column this week here a couple guys that I have, one on my keeper team, one on my non-keeper team, guys who haven't done very much for me so far, but I guess from what you're saying, owners of Hunter Pence and R.A. Dickey can be looking ahead to better days.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically with Dickey, start him at home. His splits, home versus road, are unbelievable how different they are. It must be the new ballpark, the way the wind blows that knuckleball, who knows. But in half a year there, he's 5-1 with a 3.30 ERA and a 1.22 WHIP. On the road, it's the exact opposite. He has an ERA over 5. So if you like Dickey, he's the kind of guy you want to stream, where start him at home, bench him on the road, and that's it. Don't veer from that, because the numbers are what they are, and I don't really see them changing. And then Hunter Pence, he's just too good of a real baseball player for this to be happening. It's kind of the way I look at it. Plus, he's a really, really good trade candidate, where he can go to a team that's going to be in the playoffs and vie for the World Series, and he's so clutch, and he loves that. Where I really just looked at what he did in June as what I expect from him the rest of the year. I'm throwing out April and May, and I look at June. He batted .310, 2 homers, 14 RBIs, 12 runs scored in 24 games. In April and May combined, he essentially matched those numbers, but with a 220 batting average. So I'm looking at him as a guy that should absolutely have an enormous second half, where his career OPS is over 800. And right now he's sitting at 660. When he's healthy is really the key to Hunter Pence. If he is healthy, add him and enjoy the second half of the season.
That's a great point about Pence, because the fact that he was able to do that in June and really kind of sustain it, he's getting to the kind of age where if he'd put up a third bad month in a row, you might be wondering if there's been some slippage here. But a sustained kind of rebound can really kind of put those thoughts to rest. And that would be, I think, the only reason you'd want to stay away from him, is if you thought it was the beginning of some kind of slide or just overall bad year that he wasn't going to come back from at all. But as you say, he's already come back from it in about a 30-game plus sample size and is doing very well. The thing with Dickey, this is very interesting, because I was a little higher on him than some coming into the year. That's how I ended up with him on one of my 2 teams. And I am, as we all are, connoisseurs of informed speculation. You look around in the off season at what people are saying, and I had seen some speculation that going back to the National League and going to an open-air ballpark specifically might be helpful to him. And some kind of thought that, for whatever reason, he was never quite the same once he got into the Dome. Not to say that the roof is closed all the games that he was there, but certainly enough of them. It's a shame that we don't have enough knuckleballers in baseball to really be able to tell, sample size-wise, whether there's something to that or not. But he's making a very good case right now. It seems like, we're going to learn more about how the way the park plays as time goes along. And what the biases of the park are, but he's making a heck of a case right now for putting knuckleballers out there in the open air and just letting them go.
Yeah, the Braves should check and see if Tim Wakefield wants to come out of retirement.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's not enough of these guys, or certainly they could buy low on Stephen Wright. It would seem like at this point, but there's got to be some other opportunities there, but. Yeah, it's been an interesting kind of a season, as we've been saying, in terms of this big power surge. It has been accompanied by the continued spike in strikeouts that's been going on at about a 10-year clip, and that was another thing here too. We had a piece of informed speculation about 10 years ago, because one of the guys internally was telling me, he was somebody who had been on ADHD medication, and he was telling me, this stuff's just like greenies, and they're getting rid of greenies in baseball. And I said to him, I was naive about it. I'm like, aren't the guys just going to maybe go bean up on energy drinks or other stuff? And he said, no, there's nothing that's like this kind of stuff. Because I guess the greenies they were taking in a lot of ways are like ADHD medication. He said strikeouts are going to go up. He said that 10 years ago, and that has happened just about every year since. So once again, we can't necessarily prove what's causing it, but we are simultaneously in the era of record strikeouts along with record home runs, and that is really what separates us from what we saw at the turn of the century, because overall scores are not necessarily, they're nowhere near, I think, what they were at the level at that point in time, because a lot of the home runs that are happening these days are solo home runs, two-run home runs, etc. So you've got this predominance of power on both sides here, whether it be the strikeout pitchers who are really thriving in this climate and the guys that are hitting the ball out of the park at record points in time. So while people are making some comparisons on a macro level to the steroid era, there's a lot of things that are obviously very different about this period as well.
Yeah, I think it's really tricky, though, because truth is, all of these strikeouts, all of these home runs are great for the regular season.
Yep.
The minute we get to the playoffs, it's all about pitching and contact and getting deep into, getting the starter off the mound and getting into the other team's bullpen. I still look at the Kansas City Royals from a couple of years ago, where the trend was starting with all these home run hitters, and you have the Royals who were, let's get on base, let's hit for contact, play small ball. And it won them a pennant and a World Series.
That's a very good point. Well, and you look at the game in our most recent rearview mirror here, the All-Star game, 2-1 in 10 innings, and it really does kind of lend some credence to those who are saying that when you look at the regular season, i.e., for our purposes, the fantasy season, that you're looking at perhaps a good amount of feasting on maybe even number 3, but certainly number 4 and number 5 pitchers, because you're not seeing the 4s and 5s for the most part in the postseason. Certainly none of the 5s, very few of the 4s, and the fact that when you get elite pitching on elite hitting, that does kind of bear to what you're saying here, that a lot of times, notwithstanding the number of home runs, good pitching will still beat good hitting.
Yeah, it seems that that's the truth. I mean, like you said, look at the All-Star game yesterday. But the fact that Cano and Molina both hit home runs, there were 3 runs scored and two home runs. It's sort of like, well, which way is it? Where a lot of it is luck. Where the one guy that hits that one home run goes down in history. That's playoff wise. Regular season fantasy sports, I think this is great. I think it makes it so much more fun where you're finding these guys who no one knows about, and they're going to hit you 30, 40 home runs. And it's just, you look at some of these rosters and you look at this list of guys with 20 home runs in the first half, and the layman fancier probably couldn't name half of them.
I think you're right about that, and it's a thing where, and I'm going back to what we had said in our guide prior to the season when we were talking about this and the informed point of view here about the ball being juiced or whatever the case was. Again, I'm not here to, and nor are you, I know, to get into the science of this, what's happening, how, whatever. So, on the one hand, you can easily veer into putting on the tinfoil hat. But if you're going to be an industry analyst, you have to take a look at the landscape and kind of forecast what's going to be happening and what are some of the factors of this. So as you're looking around here, again, it would be very easy to look at this from the point of view of conspiracy guy, but all things being equal, I would not think as you look ahead at the second half of the season, or even as we go into 2018, for whatever reason, I would say from my perspective, there is no reason to expect on a macro level things to be much different than they are right now. Would you kind of agree with me on that?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
And it's sort of the way I look at it. I mean, we're thinking a year ahead right now.
Yeah.
But I thought this way this year.
Mm-hmm.
On all of my fantasy teams, early round picks, I focused on speed and pitching, knowing that I could pick up home runs, RBIs, whatever I needed, off the waiver wire, late round picks, you name it, I got it. Where I just made sure that I had that D. Gordon, that I had Cameron Maben. I'm trying to think of some other guys that I drafted them probably too early, knowing that I needed steals because those are at more of a premium than I can find home runs.
Absolutely. And I know that something that is true, really, I would say, in any fantasy sport at any time, probably is more true than ever in fantasy baseball, which is really knowing and understanding the intricacies of your system that you're in, whatever the scoring system is. And these days, you're looking at a climate where it seems like 5x5 seems kind of widely, whether you call it industry standard or near industry standard, it would seem like the vast majority of people out there are probably competing in formats that are somewhat like that. When you had the steroid era going on, I think that was probably not so much the case. The league that I'm in with my co-owner at that point in time, it was a league where runs and RBI were the main offensive categories that you were getting points for. So every year we were going out there basically saying high average sluggers, and you could find a decent amount of them. Those were the guys we were building around in order to beef up our RBIs and our runs. So I would say especially, I guess, for people who are not in 5x5 leagues, because I think there's a pretty good understanding out there of how to navigate the climate right now. But if you're in a league that kind of deviates that from that in any way, shape, or form, or even if you're in a 5x5 league and you want to have a better sense of it, going through, sitting down, and kind of taking a look at this here and really kind of trying to dissect the way that this climate fits into your format, it would seem like it's more vital than ever because, as you said, there are so many edges to be exposed if you know where to look for them.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying, and a lot of the way we have to think is backwards. Like back in the day, looking for a guy who was going to hit me 25 home runs and get 100 RBIs. Mm-hmm. And now they're a dime a dozen. Where it's completely changed the way I think before the season, in the season. I now look for guys that do things that other guys can't. Is sort of the best way of looking at it. You know, back in the day, it was find that 20-20 guy because, you know, if you could get a couple of those on your team, some will overachieve, some will underachieve, but you'll come out right in the middle. Now, I'm putting guys on my roster like Jared Dyson because I know he's going to steal me 40 bases, but he's available in 75% of leagues, which blows my mind because though I find those stolen bases far more valuable than all of these guys who can hit home runs because they're everywhere.
That is absolutely right. And in terms of what your expectations are, something that I had noticed on a personal level this year, my non-keeper league team, it has really been kind of battered by injuries this year, and something that really, really hurt. This is the first time that my co-owner and I were ever in position to draft Mike Trout. We ended up with the number 1 pick, so that's been very painful seeing him out. It's funny. I'm looking at the roster and I'm seeing it, and again, we've lost a number number of weeks due to offensive output. And I look at the roster, and it's one of these things where I look up and down the line here, and it's pretty good power numbers. And then that's, it's a standard 12-team league. But then you think to yourself, you have to get out of the mentality of a roster that looked like it had enough power a year ago, something that would have been a fine team offensively 2 years ago. Right now, if you're getting hit by a lot of injuries and you've still got that mentality looking at it of like, that looks like a pretty good amount of power up and down the line, it's probably not sufficient in this climate because you're playing against a number of teams out there that have probably multiple guys over 20 home runs that you're going up against week after week.
Right. Everybody has power. So in all of my head-to-head leagues specifically, there are some weeks where I punt power, where people are like, "What do you mean?" Where if you look at the way the landscape of baseball now, I can be trying to punt power and it doesn't work because these guys who are really on my roster to steal bases end up hitting 3, 4, 5 homers in a week, and it's like, where does that come from? But that's almost to be expected now. Where that's why I love the speedy guy with pop. Mm-hmm. Is a great way to describe sort of how I build all of my teams. And those are a lot of the guys that I write about every week. Where there's a different guy every year that is, Aaron Judge, for example.
Right.
We think he was going to be like this.
No.
He was an afterthought, which is just amazing. A year ago today, he was in the minor leagues as a 24-year-old potential bust, and now he's the face of baseball.
It is amazing the way that it turns out, and along the lines of what you're saying, he's not a speedy guy with pop, but somebody who I almost think is kind of a microcosm for the first half of the season in terms of unexpected power. Of all the guys up and down the line on both rosters in the All-Star game, to have Yadier Molina hit the home run that represents the total output of National League scoring in the game right there, that really is a microcosm of the first half, is it not? That you never know where you're going to get the power from these days.
No, absolutely. It's a funny way of thinking about it. Where, and I think that this is what we have to look forward to in the second half. Everybody can hit a home run. It's finding the guy that gets hot and overachieves, or honestly selling a bunch of these guys who are on that, top 25 players right now, home run wise. So more than 20 home runs so far. Go sell them because you can find home runs on the waiver wire. Go sell them. Go get a pitcher. Go get a reliever that's going to get you saves down the stretch. Whatever you need, because you can find home runs and RBIs everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as much as I hate to say this, I have to be unbiased when I'm talking about this kind of stuff here. For anybody after the first part of the season that thought, oh my God, this is the year Frankie Lindor is going to hit 50 home runs, you would have been doing great trading him off after that big start that he had there because, again, people kind of tend to forget about this a lot of times, unfortunately, but it's so important in fantasy baseball. I would say also in basketball and hockey as well, any of the long seasons here. Regression to the mean, progression to the mean, and like you said, a lot of the guys that are up there, I would almost say like the more unexpected you are, if you're high up on the power leaderboards, the better candidate you are to trade right now because the better the chances of a fall-off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a guy who is a good example of that is a player like a Logan Morrison, where could he hit 40 home runs, 50 home runs? It's possible, but that's the kind of player who's never done this before. Yes, he was a top prospect. He's been in a couple different places. It seems like everyone hits when they're on Tampa Bay, but he's a guy that I own and I will try to sell. A similar guy would be, let's say, Yonder Alonso, where he's always been a really solid hitter, but where did these home runs come from? I'm pretty sure his 20 home runs this year are more than he's had in his career.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing here, too, that he is, I guess you could say, if you look back at his prospect status, like a very, very distant post-hype guy. This isn't post-hype as in comes up, has a year or two where he doesn't live up to expectations. It's this long after what looked like the sell-by date on this. So you raise an interesting point, because any of these people that years after they were supposed to break out, they're finally doing it now, I think there's reason for a lot of skepticism as far as that holding up.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are names where those were guys who were supposed to be really good 2-3 years ago. And now all of a sudden, maybe even more, to be honest, more than 2-3 years ago. But now you look at them, I think that the post-hype status can give you extra value if you do want to ship either of them.
That's a good point. That's a really good point, because enough people still kind of buy into this whole kind of thing here. And I think post-hype, it sounds like you and I sort of have a bit of consensus on this. Do you agree with me that it means more if you're doing it closer to what looked like the sell-by date was? If you break out a year, 2 years, 3 years after, you start getting into more than 3 years after you were supposed to become something, and it would seem like you should really have a decent amount of skepticism as far as that lasting.
Absolutely. We're two guys that are like at their sell-by date, and they haven't done it yet. Tim Anderson, Byron Buxton, where I want them to be good, but I just don't know if it'll ever happen. But I'm telling you, next year they'll both be on all of my teams in hopes that they do it, and then I can sell them.
Well, it's funny because Byron Buxton was a guy that I drafted this year, and I'd like to say the same thing next year, assuming that my co-owner isn't going to veto the mention of his name. He's generally good about not holding grudges, but yeah, that's, sometimes you got to do that. Sometimes you got to bite the bullet and go with a guy who screwed you the year before, because you don't want to miss out on whenever the breakthrough is going to come. And, there's a fine line there between being in a hole and stopping digging and being able to capitalize on it when the guy finally does break through. But, excellent stuff on both a micro and macro level with you, Paul. Really enjoy your stuff here. Check it out at RotoExperts.com. You can find the good columns on how to find the undervalued guys, a big specialty. And Paul, a pleasure getting to talk to you, break things down philosophically. Please don't be a stranger. Love to have you back on and talk some more fantasy baseball with you.
Absolutely, Rick. Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate having you on, Paul. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for FDH Lounge mini episode number 863.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and The Periodic Table of Elements.